Rain hit Elena Marsh's face like small stones, and she could not tell anymore if the wet on her skin was rain or something else. Her knees had given out somewhere near the old fence line, and now she lay against wet leaves, staring up at a sky that would not stop spinning. Her ribs burned with every breath. She pressed one hand against her side and felt warmth soak through her fingers. Minutes ago, Derek had walked away from her without looking back. He had not shouted this time. He had not needed to. His silence had always been worse than his anger, and tonight, his silence had been final. He left her at the edge of the woods the way someone leaves trash at a curb, without a second thought, without a flicker of guilt on his face. Elena had watched his tall shape disappear between the trees, and something in her chest had simply stopped fighting. She was 26 years old, and she had spent 4 of those years married to a man who treated her like a burden he regretted taking on. The Ashwood pack had never questioned it. Nobody had ever asked her if she was safe. Nobody had ever asked her if she was happy. In a world ruled by strength and hierarchy, an Omega like Elena was expected to endure, to stay quiet, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention her mate allowed her. Tonight, lying in the mud with blood on her side, Elena finally understood that no one was coming to save her. No one ever had. Her phone was still in her jacket pocket, cracked screen glowing faintly in the dark. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. The cold made her fingers stiff and clumsy, and for a moment she almost dropped it into the wet grass. She thought of her mother, long gone. She thought of the friends she had lost when she married into the Ashwood pack, friends who had drifted away because Derek disliked them, because Derek disliked most things that were not about himself. She thought of the years she had spent trying to be smaller, quieter, less of a problem. She had no one to call, no one who would come, except, perhaps, one person. Months earlier, in a moment of loneliness she barely remembered now, Elena had exchanged a few messages with a stranger online, a man named Cale Thornwood. She had found him through a forum for pack members, seeking advice on territory disputes. A small, insignificant thread where she had asked a simple question about boundary laws. He had answered her plainly, without any of the mockery she usually received from Ashwood men. They had exchanged a handful of messages after that, nothing more. She knew almost nothing about him, only that he led a pack far to the north called Blackthorn, and that people spoke his name with a strange mixture of fear and respect. She did not expect him to remember her. She did not expect anyone to remember her, not really. But her fingers moved anyway, guided by something deeper than logic, some ancient need to be witnessed before the end. She typed slowly, each letter costing her more effort than she thought possible. I don't think I'm going to make it through tonight. I just wanted someone to know I was here. Thank you for being kind to me once, when no one else was. She pressed send, before she could think twice, then let the phone slip from her fingers into the mud beside her. Her eyelids grew heavy. The rain kept falling, steady and indifferent, washing thin lines of red from her side into the dark soil. Far to the north, inside a stone hall lit by amber lanterns, Cale Thornwood sat at the head of a long table, listening to his counsel argue about grain shipments and border patrols. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered, with dark hair he never bothered to style, and eyes the color of storm clouds. People called him the Alpha King, not because he ruled every pack, but because no one had ever managed to challenge him and survive the attempt. He was known for many things: his strength, his cunning in negotiations, his complete lack of patience for weakness. He was not known for kindness. He was not known for sentiment of any kind. His second-in-command, a stocky man named Owen Bramwell, was in the middle of explaining a dispute over a shared river, when Cale's phone, resting face down on the table, buzzed once. He almost ignored it. In the past 10 years, Cale had trained himself to ignore almost everything that was not immediately useful to his pack. Distraction was weakness, and weakness was something he had eliminated from his life the day he took his father's throne. But something made him glance down anyway. Perhaps it was the late hour. Perhaps it was simply instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 assassination attempts and countless territory wars. He turned the phone over. Elena Marsh, a name he barely remembered, attached to a handful of messages from months ago about boundary laws. He almost set the phone back down. Then he read the words on the screen, and the room around him seemed to lose its sound. I don't think I'm going to make it through tonight. Cale stood so fast his chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. Owen stopped mid-sentence, and the rest of the council fell silent, staring at their alpha with confusion plain on their faces. Cale did not explain himself. He typed 4 words back, his thumb pressing hard enough against the glass that it nearly cracked. "Where are you?" "Now." He did not wait for a reply. He was already moving toward the door, phone still in hand, mind racing through everything he knew about the message. Ashwood Territory. The name had come up once, months ago, in one of her messages. He remembered it now, with sudden, sharp clarity, the way certain details surface only when they matter. Owen caught up to him in the hallway. "What is it?" he asked, but Cale did not slow down. "Get me a location on Ashwood Territory, southern border," Cale said, voice low and controlled despite the storm building behind his eyes. "Someone is hurt. I need eyes on the ground within the hour." Owen did not ask further questions. He had served under Cale long enough to know that when his alpha's voice dropped into that particular register, something serious was happening, something that would not wait for explanations. Cale reached the courtyard and did not bother calling for a vehicle. He tore off his jacket, letting it fall to the stone ground, and within seconds his body shifted, bones rearranging with practiced ease into the massive gray wolf form that had made his enemies flee on sight. He was running before his paws fully touched the earth, cutting through the gates of Blackthorn territory, like a shadow loosed from its master. The distance between Blackthorn and Ashwood territory was considerable, more than most wolves could cover quickly even at their fastest pace. But Cale was not most wolves. He tore through forest and field, ignoring the burn building in his muscles, ignoring the rain that soaked through his fur, and slowed nothing about his stride. His mind stayed fixed on 4 words that kept repeating themselves over and over. "I don't think I'm going to make it." He did not understand why this mattered so much to him. He barely knew this woman. A handful of messages, nothing more, exchanged months ago, and mostly forgotten in the chaos of running a pack. And yet something about her words had cracked something open inside him, something he had sealed away a long time ago. Perhaps it was the honesty in her message, the complete absence of manipulation or performance. Perhaps it was simply that no one had ever reached out to him that way before, with nothing to gain, only a final thought, before what she believed would be the end. Whatever the reason, Cale ran harder than he had in years, his massive paws tearing up wet earth, his breath coming in ragged pulls as he pushed his body past every limit he had set for himself. Owen's voice came through the small device fixed near his ear, relaying coordinates pulled from Elena's last known location, cross-referenced against pack border records and a satellite ping from her phone before the battery had died. Southern edge of Ashwood territory, near the old fence line, close to a ravine that marked the boundary between wild land and cultivated fields. Cale adjusted his path without breaking stride. The rain had not let up by the time he crossed into Ashwood territory, technically a violation of treaty law that governed movement between packlands. He did not care. Treaties existed to maintain peace between equals, and in this moment, peace was the furthest thing from his mind. If anyone from Ashwood tried to stop him, he would deal with the consequences afterward. Right now there was only the ravine, only the fading scent of blood and rain-soaked fear that grew stronger with every stride. He found her exactly where the coordinates indicated, a small crumpled shape against the wet earth, dark hair plastered to a pale face, one arm curled protectively around her side. For a moment, Cale's heart stopped entirely. He had seen death before, more times than he could count, and something about the stillness of her form made his chest tighten with a fear he had not felt in years. He shifted back to human form without hesitation, ignoring the cold rain against his bare skin, and dropped to his knees beside her. Her pulse was faint but present beneath his fingers when he pressed them against her throat. Relief washed through him so intensely that his hands shook. "Elena," he said, voice rough. "Elena, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered weakly, dark lashes wet with rain, but she did not fully wake. Blood had soaked through her jacket along her side, and bruising darkened one side of her face in a pattern that told Cale everything he needed to know about what had happened to her, even without words. Rage rose in him, sudden and violent, but he forced it down. There would be time for that later. Right now she needed care, not vengeance. He gathered her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries, and rose to his feet. She weighed almost nothing, and the lightness of her against his chest only deepened the ache building behind his ribs. He looked down at her pale, still face for one long moment before turning back toward Blackthorn territory, moving now not as a wolf but as a man, carrying something he had decided, in that instant, he would not allow to slip away. The journey back felt endless, though it took only half the time it had taken him to arrive. Cale pushed through exhaustion he barely registered. His focus narrowed entirely to the shallow rise and fall of Elena's chest against his own. Owen met him at the gates with a team already assembled, having anticipated exactly what his alpha would need, before Cale had said a word. "Get Dr. Fay now," Cale barked, striding through the courtyard without slowing. "Prep the East Wing. She's lost blood, and I don't know how much." Owen fell into step beside him, sparing one glance down at Elena's still form, before looking back up at his alpha's face, an expression there he had never seen before, not once in the 10 years he had served beside Cale Thornwood. "Who is she?" Owen asked quietly. Cale did not answer immediately. He carried Elena through the wide doors of the pack's main hall, past startled guards and wide-eyed staff, who had never seen their alpha carry anyone, let alone an unconscious stranger soaked in blood and rain. "Someone who matters," Cale finally said, and though his voice remained steady, something in the words carried a weight that silenced any further questions. The East Wing had been prepared within minutes, a testament to the efficiency Cale demanded from his pack. Dr. Fay, an older woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, arrived just as Cale laid Elena down on the clean sheets of a private room. She immediately began assessing the wound along Elena's side, her expression grim but focused. "Deep laceration, possibly from a fall against something sharp," she muttered, half to herself, half to Cale, who stood rigid near the doorway, unwilling to leave despite having no medical skill to offer. "Blood loss is significant, but not immediately life-threatening, if we act quickly. Bruising suggests repeated trauma over an extended period, not just tonight." Cale's jaw tightened at those words, understanding settling over him with a cold, heavy weight. This had not been a single incident. Whatever had happened to Elena Marsh had been happening for a long time. "Will she survive?" he asked, voice low. Dr. Fay glanced up at him, taking in the intensity in his expression with a small measure of surprise, before returning her attention to her patient. "If we work quickly, yes. She's strong. Weaker people would not have survived what she's been through." Cale remained by the door as the medical team worked, refusing every suggestion that he leave, refusing food, refusing rest, refusing anything that would take his eyes off the pale, still woman on the bed. Hours passed in a blur of quiet activity, hushed voices, and the steady beeping of monitors that had been brought in from the pack's small clinic. Somewhere near dawn, as gray light began creeping through the tall windows, Elena's condition finally stabilized. Dr. Fay stepped back from the bed, exhaustion evident in the lines of her face, and gave Cale a small, tired nod. "She'll live," the doctor said simply. "She needs rest now, more than anything. Her body has been through more than most people could survive." Cale let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something other than the cold calculation that governed most of his decisions. He felt relief, so profound it nearly buckled his knees. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, watching Elena's chest rise and fall in steady, even breaths. Her face, even bruised and pale, held a quiet strength that struck him deeply, something in the set of her jaw, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of a resilience most people never had to develop. Outside the room, whispers had already begun to spread through the pack. The Alpha King had crossed into rival territory in the middle of the night. He had carried an injured Omega from another pack back to Blackthorn with his own hands. He had refused to leave her side for hours. None of it made sense to anyone who thought they understood Cale Thornwood, the cold, unshakable ruler, who had never shown this kind of concern for anyone, not even his own kin. But Cale did not care what anyone thought. He sat beside Elena through the early hours of morning, watching over a woman he barely knew, feeling something shift inside him that he could not yet name, only recognize as something entirely new. When Elena finally began to stir, hours later, sunlight had fully filled the room, warm and golden against the pale walls. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly, confusion clouding her gaze as she took in unfamiliar surroundings, unfamiliar scents, an unfamiliar ceiling above her. Panic flared briefly in her chest, before her eyes landed on the man seated beside her bed, watching her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but instead, strangely, did not. "Where am I?" she asked, voice barely more than a whisper, throat dry and raw. Cale leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice gentle, despite how unfamiliar gentleness felt on his tongue. "You're safe," he said simply. "That's all that matters right now." Elena stared at him, recognition slowly dawning despite her confusion. "You're him," she whispered. "The one I messaged." Cale nodded once. "My name is Cale Thornwood. You're in Blackthorn territory now. No one here will hurt you." Elena's eyes filled with tears she did not have the strength to hold back, relief and disbelief mixing together, as the reality of her survival slowly settled over her. She had sent that message expecting nothing, expecting no one, and yet here he was, a stranger who had somehow become the only person who had ever come when she called. "I didn't think anyone would come," she whispered. Cale's expression softened in a way that would have shocked anyone who knew him. "I almost didn't see the message in time," he admitted quietly. "But I'm here now, and you're not going back to whatever hurt you like this. Not while I have any say in it." Elena did not know what to say to that. She had spent 4 years believing she deserved nothing better than silence and neglect, believing her pain mattered to no one, not even herself most days. And now, in this unfamiliar room, surrounded by unfamiliar kindness, she felt something she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She felt seen. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the quiet between them filled with something neither fully understood yet, something fragile and new that neither dared to name. Outside the window, the sun climbed higher, casting warm light across the room, across the space between them, across the beginning of something that would change both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. 3 days passed before Elena felt strong enough to sit up without her head spinning. Dr. Fay visited each morning, checking her wounds, changing bandages, murmuring approval at how quickly her body was healing, now that she was finally somewhere safe. Elena barely recognized herself in the mirror the staff eventually brought her. The bruising along her face had faded from deep purple to a sickly yellow-green, and though her ribs still ached with every deep breath, she no longer felt like she was drowning. Cale visited every day, sometimes twice, always finding some reason to check on her progress, even though Dr. Fay's reports would have told him everything he needed to know. He never stayed long during those early days, aware that Elena needed rest more than company, but each visit left her with a strange, unfamiliar warmth she did not know how to process. On the 4th day, she finally found the strength to ask him the question that had been sitting in her chest since she woke. "Why did you come?" she asked, watching him carefully from where she sat propped against a mountain of pillows. "You barely knew me. We exchanged a few messages months ago, that's all." Cale considered the question for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful, as he looked toward the window, rather than at her. "I've asked myself the same thing more than once since that night," he admitted. "I don't have a perfect answer. Something about your message felt different from anything anyone has ever sent me. You weren't asking for help. You weren't trying to manipulate me into caring. You were just telling the truth, even though you thought no one would read it." Elena's fingers twisted in the blanket covering her lap. "I really didn't think anyone would," she admitted quietly. "I sent it because I didn't want to disappear without anyone knowing I existed at all." Something flickered across Cale's face, a shadow of anger that Elena suspected was not directed at her. "You're not disappearing," he said firmly. "Not while I have a say in what happens next." Elena studied him carefully, trying to reconcile the stories she had heard about the Alpha King, a man known for his ruthlessness in negotiations and his complete lack of mercy toward enemies, with the quiet, steady presence sitting beside her bed. Neither version seemed to fully capture the man in front of her. "You have a reputation," she said carefully. "People talk about you like you're made of stone." A faint, almost amused expression crossed Cale's face. "Most people only see what serves them to see," he said. "It's easier to lead a pack when your enemies believe you feel nothing. Feelings are vulnerabilities in the world I live in. And yet here you are," Elena pointed out softly, "feeling something enough to break treaty law and cross into rival territory in the middle of the night." Cale's gaze finally met hers directly, something unguarded passing between them that neither fully understood yet. "Yes," he admitted. "Here I am." The conversation shifted after that, moving into safer territory, though Elena noticed Cale seemed reluctant to leave once the silence settled comfortably between them. He asked about her life before Ashwood, about the childhood she had spent in a small pack near the coast before her parents' deaths had left her with distant relatives, who eventually arranged her marriage to Derek as part of a territorial agreement between packs. Elena found herself talking more freely than she had in years, surprised by how easily the words came when someone actually seemed interested in listening, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. She talked about her mother's laughter, about the small garden she used to tend as a child, about dreams she had long ago abandoned of studying medicine before her marriage made such ambitions impossible. Cale listened to all of it without interrupting, without judgment, filing away every small detail she shared, with a quiet intensity that made Elena feel, for the first time in years, like her story actually mattered to someone. It was during one of these conversations, nearly a week into her recovery, that Elena finally spoke about Derek, about the years of quiet cruelty that had led her to that ravine in the rain. She had not planned to tell him everything, but somehow the words spilled out once she started. 4 years of silence breaking apart all at once. She told him about the wedding, arranged without her consent by relatives eager to strengthen ties with Ashwood territory. She told him about the early months, when Derek's coldness had seemed like simple disinterest, rather than the beginning of something far darker. She told him about the isolation that followed, how Derek had slowly cut her off from any friends who might have noticed what was happening, how the Ashwood pack leadership had looked away every time she tried to speak up, treating her concerns as the complaints of an ungrateful Omega who did not understand her place. She told him about the night everything finally broke, about Derek's cold, deliberate cruelty as he left her in the woods, certain she would either crawl back to him or simply cease to be a problem he had to manage. By the time she finished, tears streaked silently down her face, and Cale's hands had curled into fists at his sides, knuckles white with barely restrained fury. He did not speak for a long moment, working to control the rage building inside him before he trusted himself to say anything at all. "He will answer for this," Cale finally said, voice low and dangerously even. "Every single day he made you suffer, he will answer for it." Elena shook her head weakly. "It doesn't matter now. I got away. That's enough." "It is not enough," Cale said firmly, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What happened to you was not a private matter between mates. It was cruelty that an entire pack chose to ignore. That kind of silence enables monsters, Elena. I won't pretend it doesn't exist just because it's uncomfortable to confront." Come. Elena studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her chest at the sight of his barely contained anger. Anger that existed entirely on her behalf, something she had never experienced from anyone in her life. Derek's cruelty had taught her to expect nothing from the people meant to protect her. Cale's fury taught her something entirely different. That night, after Cale finally left to attend to pack business he had been neglecting all week, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, turning over everything that had happened in the past several days. She thought about the message she had sent, believing it would be her last words to anyone. She thought about waking up in an unfamiliar bed to find a stranger who had somehow become the reason she was still breathing. She thought about the way Cale's anger, unlike Derek's, had never once been directed at her, had only ever burned on her behalf. She did not know what to call the feeling growing quietly in her chest, but she recognized, with a strange mixture of hope and fear, that it was something she had never expected to feel again. Meanwhile, Cale had already set his investigation into motion. Working through Owen and a small network of trusted contacts within Ashwood territory, he began piecing together a pattern of behavior that painted a far darker picture than even Elena's account had suggested. Witnesses came forward slowly, cautiously, people who had noticed things over the years, but had said nothing out of fear or simple indifference to the suffering of an Omega they considered beneath their concern. A former household servant recalled bruises Elena had tried to hide beneath long sleeves during the coldest months of summer. A neighboring pack member remembered an incident nearly 2 years prior, when Elena had shown up at a gathering with a limp she claimed came from a fall. A junior pack official, speaking only under promise of anonymity, admitted that Derek's father had quietly paid off 2 previous complaints filed against his son years before Elena's marriage, complaints from women who had since left Ashwood territory entirely, rather than continue facing consequences for speaking out. The picture that emerged was not simply one man's cruelty toward his mate. It was a system that had protected that cruelty for years, choosing convenience and reputation over the safety of the people it claimed to serve. Cale brought this evidence to Owen late one evening, the two men reviewing documents spread across a long table in Cale's private study. "This goes back further than Elena," Owen said grimly, flipping through pages of testimony collected over the past week. "If this comes out publicly, it won't just destroy Derek. It could destabilize the entire Ashwood leadership." "Good," Cale said flatly. "A leadership built on covering up abuse doesn't deserve stability." Owen studied his alpha carefully, noting the shift that had settled over Cale in the past week, a focus and intensity that went beyond simple justice, something that had clearly become personal, in a way Owen had rarely seen from him. "You care about her," Owen said, not quite a question. Cale did not immediately answer, his gaze fixed on the documents in front of him. "More than I expected to," he finally admitted. "More than makes sense given how little time has passed." "Sometimes it doesn't need to make sense," Owen said quietly. "Sometimes it just is what it is." Cale said nothing further, but the words settled somewhere deep in his chest, a quiet acknowledgement of something he had been avoiding fully naming since the night he had run through the rain toward a woman he barely knew. As the days continued to pass, Elena's recovery progressed steadily. She began taking short walks through the gardens behind the main hall, accompanied always by either Cale himself or a member of his trusted staff. The Blackthorn pack, initially wary of the injured stranger their alpha had brought home, slowly began to warm toward her as they witnessed her quiet strength, her gentle manner with the pack's children, her genuine gratitude toward everyone who helped care for her. Cale found himself rearranging his schedule more and more often to spend time with her, walks through the garden stretching into longer conversations, quiet dinners that lasted well past when either of them intended. He told himself it was simply concern for someone under his protection, but the excuse grew thinner with each passing day. Each moment he found himself anticipating her laughter, her quiet observations about the world around her, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about small things that clearly still brought her joy, despite everything she had endured. Elena, for her part, found herself healing in ways that went beyond her physical wounds. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to simply exist without calculating every word, every action, against the possibility of punishment. She felt, slowly, the return of pieces of herself she had thought lost forever. Curiosity, humor, a quiet confidence that had been buried beneath years of fear. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after Cale had carried her broken body out of the rain, they sat together on a stone bench overlooking the gardens, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. Elena had grown strong enough to walk without assistance now, though Cale still hovered nearby out of habit more than necessity. "I never properly thanked you," Elena said quietly, watching the colors shift across the sky. "For coming. For everything since." "You don't need to thank me," Cale said, his voice carrying a gentleness that still surprised him every time he used it. "I would do it again without hesitation." Elena glanced over at him, studying the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his gray eyes even in this quiet, peaceful moment. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why me?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I've led this pack for 10 years, he finally said. "I've made decisions that affected thousands of lives, decisions that required me to be cold, calculating, ruthless when necessary. I stopped believing a long time ago that anything could reach past that, and then a stranger sent me a message in the middle of the night, and something in me refused to ignore it, refused to let it be the last thing anyone heard from her." He turned to face her fully, something raw and unguarded in his expression that Elena had never seen from him before. "I don't fully understand what's happening between us, Elena," he admitted, "but I know I don't want it to stop." Elena's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope so intense it nearly stole her breath entirely. Years of conditioning told her to be cautious, to expect disappointment, to brace for the moment when kindness would inevitably reveal itself as another form of control. But something deeper, something that had been slowly rebuilding itself over the past 3 weeks, told her that this man, this quiet, intense, unexpectedly gentle man, was different from anyone she had ever known. "I don't want it to stop either," she admitted softly, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing as she spoke them into the fading evening light. Neither of them moved to close the distance between them, both understanding instinctively that whatever was building between them needed time, needed patience, needed space to grow, without the pressure of expectation. But something had shifted in that quiet garden as the sun sank below the horizon, an understanding passing between them that neither fully spoke aloud, but both clearly felt. For the first time since the rain-soaked night that had nearly ended her life, Elena Marsh allowed herself to imagine a future that did not involve fear, did not involve silence, did not involve making herself small enough to survive. She imagined, instead, a future built on something she had never truly experienced before. She imagined a future built on being chosen, not out of obligation or convenience, but out of genuine care. And somewhere in the quiet stone hall of Blackthorn territory, far from the woods that had nearly claimed her life, that future began, slowly and carefully, to take shape. The peace lasted exactly 4 days before it shattered completely. A messenger arrived at Blackthorn's gates, just after dawn, breathless from hard travel, carrying a sealed letter bearing the Ashwood crest. Owen intercepted him first, reading the contents with a deepening frown, before carrying it directly to Cale's private study, where his alpha was already reviewing morning reports. "You need to see this now," Owen said, setting the letter down without ceremony. Cale read it twice, his expression darkening with each line. The letter, written in Derek's own hand, demanded Elena's immediate return to Ashwood territory, invoking ancient mating law that granted a mate certain rights over an Omega, regardless of personal grievances. Derek framed himself as the wronged party, claiming Elena had fled during what he described as a moment of confusion, following a minor disagreement, and accused Cale of harboring a fugitive in violation of Interpact Treaty. "He's rewriting the entire story," Cale said, voice tight with controlled fury. "Making himself the victim. That's exactly what men like him do," Owen said grimly. "And unfortunately, the mating law he's invoking isn't entirely without merit. If this goes before a formal tribunal, Ashwood has legal standing to argue their case." Cale set the letter down, jaw clenched tight. "Then we'll make sure the tribunal hears the full truth, not just the version Derek wants them to believe." News of the letter reached Elena within the hour, and Cale watched something in her posture crumble the moment she read Derek's words. Years of conditioned fear resurfacing instantly despite everything she had rebuilt over the past weeks. Her hands trembled as she set the letter down on the table between them. "He'll never stop," she whispered. "Even now, even after everything, he still thinks he owns me." Cale reached across the table, covering her trembling hands with his own, steady and warm. "He doesn't own you," Cale said firmly. "And he never will again. Whatever happens next, I promise you this is not a fight you'll face alone." Elena searched his face, finding nothing but unwavering resolve there. "But you heard Owen," she said quietly. "The law might actually favor him. Laws can be challenged when they protect cruelty instead of preventing it," Cale said. "And I have evidence now, Elena. Testimony. A pattern that goes back years before you. This isn't just your story anymore. It's proof of something far larger that Ashwood has spent years trying to hide." Elena absorbed this slowly, something steadying in her chest even as fear continued to churn beneath the surface. "I want to face him," she finally said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Not hide from this. Not let him control the story anymore. I want to stand in front of whoever needs to hear it and tell the truth myself." Cale studied her carefully, pride and worry warring within him in equal measure. "Are you certain?" he asked. "It won't be easy. He'll try to twist everything, to make you doubt yourself in front of everyone watching." "I've spent 4 years being made to doubt myself in private," Elena said, a new steel entering her voice that Cale had not heard from her before. "I won't do it in private anymore. If he wants a tribunal, then he can hear the truth in front of everyone." Something fierce and proud swelled in Cale's chest at her words, watching the quiet strength that had clearly always existed within her finally rising fully to the surface after years of being forced into silence. "I'll stand beside you through every moment of it," he promised. The following 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Owen worked tirelessly, gathering formal testimony from witnesses willing to speak on record, while Cale's legal advisors built a case that would challenge not just Derek's claim to Elena, but the entire pattern of protection Ashwood leadership had extended to him over the years. Dr. Fay provided medical documentation of Elena's injuries, both from the night in the ravine and from older scars that told their own silent story of years of harm. Elena spent hours each day working with Cale's advisors, preparing to speak in front of a tribunal that would include representatives from multiple packs, elders whose judgment carried significant weight across pack territories. It was grueling work, forcing her to relive memories she had spent years trying to bury, but with each session, Elena felt something shifting inside her, transforming pain into purpose. Cale remained a constant presence throughout the preparation, never pushing her further than she was ready to go, always available when the weight of memory became too heavy to carry alone. Their bond deepened through those difficult weeks, built not on grand gestures but on quiet moments of support, late-night conversations that stretched into early morning, the steady comfort of simply not being alone anymore. News of the upcoming tribunal spread quickly across pack territories, whispers and speculation following in its wake. Some questioned why the Alpha King would risk treaty tensions over an Omega from a rival pack. Others, particularly among the younger generation, increasingly frustrated with old hierarchies that protected cruelty in the name of tradition, watched with growing interest, sensing that something significant was about to shift within the established order. Derek, for his part, grew increasingly desperate as the tribunal date approached. He sent additional letters, some pleading, some threatening, each one revealing more of the true nature Elena had spent years trying to survive. Cale kept every single one, adding them to the growing collection of evidence that painted an unmistakable picture of a man unable to accept that his control over another person had finally slipped away. The morning of the tribunal arrived cold and clear, the sky a pale, cloudless blue stretching endlessly over the neutral grounds chosen for the proceedings, a large stone hall situated between the territories of several packs, used historically for matters requiring judgment from multiple leaders rather than a single authority. Elena dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple dark green dress that Dr. Fay's daughter had helped her select, nothing elaborate, nothing meant to draw attention beyond the truth she planned to speak. She stared at her reflection for a long moment before Cale knocked softly on her door, stepping inside when she called for him to enter. He stopped in the doorway, something unreadable crossing his face as he took in the sight of her, steady and resolved despite the fear he knew she carried beneath the surface. "You look ready," he said quietly. "I don't feel ready," Elena admitted. "But I think that's different from not being ready." Cale crossed the room and took her hands gently in his own. "Whatever happens today," he said, meeting her eyes with quiet intensity, "you have already survived the worst of it. Today, you simply get to speak the truth out loud." "That's all." Elena nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence, and together they made their way toward the stone hall, where dozens of pack representatives had already gathered, murmurs of anticipation filling the cavernous space as word spread that both parties had arrived. Derek stood near the front of the hall alongside members of Ashwood leadership, dressed impeccably, his expression carefully arranged into one of wounded dignity that made Elena's stomach turn the moment she saw it. He had always been skilled at performance, at presenting exactly the image he needed people to see, and clearly he intended to rely on that skill today, more than ever. The tribunal elders took their seats at the front of the hall, 5 representatives from different pack territories chosen for their neutrality and reputation for fair judgment. The eldest among them, a silver-haired woman named Delphine who had presided over tribunals for nearly 3 decades, called the proceedings to order with a firm, steady voice that immediately silenced the murmuring crowd. Derek spoke first, exactly as Elena had expected, weaving a careful narrative that painted himself as a devoted mate, abandoned during a moment of emotional instability, framing Elena's injuries as the result of an unfortunate accident, rather than deliberate cruelty. He spoke of loyalty, of tradition, of the sacred bond between mates that Cale Thornwood had violated by harboring Elena within Blackthorn territory. Elena listened to every word with a steady, controlled expression, feeling Cale's hand find hers beneath the table where they sat, a silent reminder that she was not facing this alone. When Derek finally finished speaking, satisfaction evident in the slight curve of his mouth, Delphine turned her sharp gaze toward Elena. "Elena Marsh," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "You may respond." Elena rose slowly to her feet, her heart pounding fiercely against her ribs, but her voice, when it finally emerged, remained steady and clear, carrying easily to every corner of the hall. For 4 years, she began, I believed my silence was the price of survival. I believed that speaking the truth would only make things worse, that no one would listen even if I found the courage to try. I was wrong about the second part. I know now that people do listen, when given the chance. I was simply never given that chance until now. She spoke then of the years of isolation, of the small cruelties that had accumulated slowly enough that she had almost failed to recognize the pattern forming around her. She spoke of the bruises she had learned to hide beneath long sleeves, of the complaints she had tried to raise with Ashwood leadership, only to be dismissed as an ungrateful Omega who did not understand her place. She spoke, finally, of the night Derek had left her bleeding in the woods, certain she would either crawl back to him in submission or simply cease to exist as a problem he no longer wished to manage. The hall remained utterly silent as she spoke, the weight of her words settling over the assembled crowd with undeniable gravity. Even Derek's carefully arranged expression began to crack, anger flickering beneath the surface of his performed composure. When Elena finished, Owen presented the evidence they had gathered over the past weeks, testimony from Ashwood residents who had witnessed Derek's cruelty over the years, medical documentation of injuries both recent and old, records of previous complaints that had been quietly buried by Ashwood leadership, eager to protect their reputation, rather than the people harmed by Derek's actions. The revelation of previous complaints sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd, murmurs breaking out as PAC representatives absorbed the full scope of what had been hidden for years. Derek's careful composure finally shattered entirely, his voice rising as he attempted to deny the accumulating evidence, but the truth had grown too large, too thoroughly documented, to be dismissed any longer. Delphine allowed the chaos to settle before speaking again, her expression grave as she surveyed the evidence laid before her. This tribunal has heard sufficient testimony to render judgment, she announced, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs. The pattern presented here represents a severe and sustained violation of the trust and protection owed between mates, compounded by deliberate concealment on the part of Ashwood leadership. She turned her sharp gaze toward Derek, who had gone pale beneath the weight of the tribunal's judgment. Derek of Ashwood, you are hereby stripped of your title and standing within PAC hierarchy, effective immediately. Furthermore, this tribunal formally releases Elena Marsh from any remaining obligation to Ashwood territory, granting her full autonomy to determine her own future without interference or claim from her former mate. A wave of reaction swept through the hall, some representatives nodding in solemn agreement, others whispering urgently among themselves as the implications settled over the gathered crowd. Derek stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time, before dozens of witnesses, the truth finally too loud to be silenced any longer. Elena felt Cale's hand tighten around her own, and when she glanced up at him, she found his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression of fierce, unmistakable pride. Years of fear and silence seemed to lift from her shoulders in that single moment, replaced by something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt free. The Ashwood leadership, disgraced by the public revelation of their years of complicity, faced their own reckoning in the weeks that followed, several senior officials stepping down under mounting pressure from other PAC territories, increasingly unwilling to overlook cruelty hidden behind claims of tradition and hierarchy. Derek disappeared from public PAC life entirely, stripped of the status and protection that had allowed his cruelty to flourish unchecked for so many years. Elena, for the first time in her adult life, stood entirely free of the fear that had shaped nearly every decision she had made since her arranged marriage. As she walked out of the stone hall that afternoon, sunlight breaking through scattered clouds overhead, she felt Cale's hand find hers once more, steady and warm, a silent promise of everything still to come. Weeks turned into months, and Elena settled fully into life within Blackthorn territory, each day carrying her further from the woman who had once believed her existence mattered to no one. She began studying medicine under Dr. Fay's careful guidance, finally pursuing the dream she had abandoned years before her marriage, finding purpose in learning to heal others the way she herself had been healed. Her relationship with Cale grew slowly, deliberately, neither rushing towards something neither fully understood in the beginning, but both had come to recognize as something rare and worth protecting carefully. They walked the gardens together most evenings, shared quiet dinners filled with easy conversation, built a foundation of trust and genuine care that neither had ever experienced in their respective pasts. Cale found himself transformed, in ways his own counsel noticed with quiet astonishment. The cold, unshakable Alpha King, softening in small but unmistakable ways whenever Elena entered a room. He laughed more easily now, listened more patiently, governed his pack with the same strength as always, but tempered now with a warmth that had been entirely absent before the night he ran through the rain to save a stranger who had somehow become the center of his world. One evening, nearly a year after Elena had first arrived at Blackthorn territory, broken and barely alive, Cale led her out into the gardens, where the entire pack had quietly gathered, lanterns strung between the trees casting warm golden light across the grounds. Elena stopped short at the sight, confusion and wonder mixing on her face as she took in the assembled crowd, all watching with quiet anticipation. Cale turned to face her, taking both her hands in his own, his gray eyes steady and clear as he spoke words he had spent months preparing to say. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying easily through the quiet garden, "I received a message from a stranger who believed she had no one left to turn to. That message changed everything I thought I understood about my own life. It taught me that strength isn't measured by how little you feel, but by how much you're willing to fight for what matters most." Elena's eyes filled with tears as he continued, the entire gathered pack watching in reverent silence. "Elena Marsh," Cale said, kneeling now before her, "you arrived in my life broken by cruelty you never deserved, and you have shown me, every single day since, what true strength looks like. I am not asking you to be my mate, out of obligation or convenience. I am asking because I have never known anyone who makes me want to be better, stronger, kinder, than you do simply by being yourself." He produced a simple silver ring, elegant in its understated beauty, and looked up at her with an openness that stripped away every layer of the fearsome reputation that had once defined him entirely. "Will you choose me?" Cale asked softly, "the way I have chosen you, not as property, not as obligation, but as an equal, as my partner, as the person I want beside me for the rest of my life?" Elena, tears streaming freely down her face now, sank to her knees in front of him, cupping his face gently in her hands. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger, a declaration rather than simply an answer. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The gathered pack erupted into joyful celebration as Cale rose and pulled Elena into his arms, holding her close beneath the lantern-lit sky, the woman who had once believed herself forgotten, now standing at the center of a community that had come to cherish her deeply. In the months that followed, their bond was formally recognized before representatives from packs across the region, Elena taking her place not as a possession claimed through obligation, but as Luna of Blackthorn, an equal partner in every sense, her voice carrying weight in pack decisions, her compassion shaping policies that extended protection to Omegas across territories, who had once suffered in silence, exactly as she had. She continued her medical studies, eventually establishing a program within Blackthorn territory, dedicated to supporting survivors of the kind of abuse she herself had endured, ensuring that no one else would have to send a final desperate message into the void, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might actually answer. Cale stood beside her through every step of this new chapter, no longer simply the cold, feared Alpha King the world had once known him to be, but a partner, a protector, a man who had learned that true strength included the courage to feel deeply, to care fiercely, to run through the rain without hesitation when someone needed saving. Years later, when younger pack members asked how their Alpha and Luna had come to find each other, the story was told again and again, passed between generations, as proof that even in the darkest moments, even when hope seemed entirely lost, a single message, a single choice to reach out, could change the course of an entire life. Elena Marsh, once broken and unseen, had become something the world had never expected. She had become proof that survival was only the beginning, that healing was possible, that love, real and unconditional, could grow from even the deepest pain. And every single night, as she fell asleep beside Cale, within the walls of the home they had built together, she remembered the woman, lying broken in the rain, certain her story was ending, and she silently thanked her for finding the courage, even in her darkest moment, to send one last message into the world. That single message had not marked the end of her story. It had marked the beginning of everything that truly mattered.